Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're really glad to have you here. We're going to have a Q&A webinar March 19th. So if you have any burning questions for us here at PigBrig, please feel free to drop your questions into our poll. We're super excited to see what you guys have to ask. If you have any questions during the presentation, we're going to ask for you to put them in the Q&A box. So we'll have some time at the end to go through some of your questions for this presentation. So as I continue to let some more folks roll in, we're going to take a few minutes. Sydney, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing today?
Of course, I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm great. I'm great. I'm excited for the webinar. The whole team is. I'm sure we have a lot of our Pig Brig folks here already. And we have a lot of people who are excited for your webinar as well. Do you get
Awesome.
to talk a lot about your research
Yeah, I've
normally?
I've had a few opportunities to present some of my research at different conferences and stuff, but I'm really excited to get to present to people that will actually be able to use some of these results out in the field. I think that'll be really awesome, and hopefully people can get something out of that.
Yeah. So are you normally like speaking to other like people who are in the research field?
Yeah, typically I've presented at conferences. There's been some agency folks and stuff along those lines, but it's usually at research conferences.
Beautiful. Have you had a favorite conference that you've been to recently?
I had the opportunity to go to TWS up in Canada this past fall, and that was
That's
really awesome
awesome.
just because I'd never been to Canada. So to be able to see that was really cool. And there was just kind of a broader group of people at that conference, which was interesting to see what people were doing around the world.
Yeah, that's awesome. I actually haven't been to Canada either, but I've been right there. I visited Niagara Falls one time and I didn't have my passport with me. So I was viewing Canada from just across the little river.
That was me too. I forgot my passport when I went to Niagara Falls too.
Oh, it's beautiful. What part of Canada were you in for the conference?
It was in Edmonton, so it was pretty close to like Jasper and Banff National Parks. So after the conference, I did some personal travel up there, which was
I
awesome.
was about to say, Banff is beautiful. I'm
Yeah,
glad you were able to travel some more. So were you hiking and
yeah,
whatnot,
yeah. We were
sightseeing?
camping and hiking, and it was gorgeous. And seeing like the elk and the moose and all those critters we don't have down here.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't know what to do if I saw a moose. I don't think I've ever seen one. I know I haven't ever seen one, especially not here in South Carolina. All right. Well, it looks like we're starting to slow down with some of our participants. So I'm going to go ahead and close our poll. All righty then. And so it's time to get started. Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming to today's webinar, Baiting Strategies to Maximize Pig Visitation. I'm Abby Good, the Product Support Specialist at Pig Brig Trap Systems. Now that everyone is here, and before we dive into the presentation, I just have a couple of quick housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded, so everyone who is registered will get a link to the recording in the next couple of weeks whenever it's made available. In the meantime, if you'd like to catch up on past webinars, you can visit our YouTube channel. They're all posted there. And then lastly, if you have any questions for Sydney as you are viewing her presentation, please put them in our Q&A box. It's a feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And at the end, we'll have some time set away to answer some of your questions, and we'll get to as many as we can. But with that, I think we're good to go. I'd like to welcome our speaker, Sydney Brewer. Sydney, I'm going to hand it off to you, and please feel free to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're at, where you're from, what you're doing. But yeah, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you, Abby. So as she mentioned, my name is Sydney Brewer. I am going to be presenting today on some of my master's work that I did with Dr. James Beasley. And so that's going to be what I was working on the past 3 years. And now I still am currently working in the Beasley lab, but now as a research professional out on Blackbeard Island working on removing pigs out here. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. I'm going to be talking about the role of bait, lures, and pig movement in visitation to trap sites. So kind of what we're going to be walking through today is thinking about the roles of baits and lures at these trap sites, thinking about site selection, so where bait is going to be placed on the landscape to attract wild pigs, as well as investigating wild pig social structure and interactions at bait site, and then further considering the role of wild pig movement. So everyone wants to know, how do I get pigs to a site? Why are pigs not visiting a site? So we're going to hopefully tease some things out to help answer those questions today. I do want to start this talk by saying that everyone has their method for attracting wild pigs, and if something you're doing is working for you, awesome, keep doing it. If you're looking for new things to try or suggestions, then some of these things I may have to share will be helpful for you. And then I just want to highlight that my research came about because there was very limited controlled studies evaluating how to improve site detection of pigs for management activity. So, attractants are used to attract wildlife to a location for a management action to occur. Specifically, we're going to be talking about this action being trapping of wild pigs today. So, a variety of attractants can be used, such as bait, scent lures, visuals, and sounds. Today, we're primarily going to focus on bait and scent lures, as those are what are commonly used for wild pigs. So, trappers use a variety of baits, and other research has shown that multiple baits can be effective at attracting wild pigs, such as corn, peanuts, soybeans, earthworms, etc. This works because pigs are opportunistic omnivores with a huge range of dietary items, including vegetation, mast, carrion, insects, fungi, etc. Another thing to consider is that trappers also present their bait differently. Some prefer to dump a big pile of corn in one spot. Other people prefer to scatter their bait around. Some people will use traditional spin feeders. And there also are other types of pig-specific feeders that people use as well. And there previously was no formal research looking at the presentation of pig baits. So scent-lures are going to be defined as products that provide a smell but don't have any sort of food reward associated with them. We know wild pigs have an advanced olfactory system and that they utilize scent for foraging and social interaction. And there's a huge commercial market of scent lures marketed for wild pigs. However, previous research has resulted in very mixed results on how different scent lures perform and just scent lure performance in general. So, this led to a comprehensive study that was led by Dr. Nathan Snow in the Beasley Lab. This study was the most comprehensive study of scents because of these smaller ones that were resulting in some mixed things. And they evaluated 29 scent attractants, looking at a few different categories of food, pheromone, and curiosity. And they investigated this across 3 seasons and had two different study sites. As you can see on this map, one of them was located in South Carolina and the other one was in Texas. So they would deploy their scent stations for 7 days, and they consisted of these two scent tabs that would be soaked in the specific scent and attached to the T-post at the base of it and the top of it. And each of their scents were deployed a total of 24 times each season, which resulted in over 2,000 replicates in this study. I also forgot to mention they had control sites, which consisted of no scent. It would just be the T-post with the tabs with no scent on them. So this figure shows the results from this study. So on the x-axis, you can see that there's all the scents that were tested, and then it's looking at the visitation at these sites. And it was for each of those study sites, South Carolina and Texas. From this, I just want to highlight that only two scent attractants had greater visitation than the control treatments, and this was strawberry and creosote bush oil, and this was only in Texas and only during the fall season. So this paper was published in 2022, and their overall results were finding that scents were performing the same or worse than control sites with no scent. And further, they recommended some more research because of the fact that wild pigs may be attracted to this scent, but they might not be captured on the camera because there's no food reward there. So they recommended coupling bait with scent as well as looking at GPS collars to see if these pigs are moving in and it's just not being captured by the cameras. So another thing that we want to think about when we're thinking about attracting wild pigs and trapping them is the social structure. So sounders are going to consist of your female pigs and their offspring. These are often what people are targeting for trapping efforts due to the high reproductive potential of females. They can have piglets a couple times a year and will have multiple piglets in those litters. It's also important to think about our males, though. Adult males typically will be in solitarity. However, they will be seen interacting with sounders in order to breed. And you also can see these bachelor groups typically consisting of younger males, but not always. It's really important to also think about managing our males, as oftentimes that's what people are reporting, causing huge amounts of damage. You can see one male move through an area and totally destroy that landscape in one night. So another thing someone has to think about when thinking about attracting wild pigs is the site location. Wild pigs live in a variety of habitats. They're found all across the US at this point, and they're considered habitat generalists. However, at a coarse scale, they are associated with wetlands, streams, hardwoods, and other similar habitats. Further, some fine scale habitat features have been looked at in other research and have been shown to increase scent station visitation, vehicle collisions, as well as rooting damage. So, space use of these animals kind of dictates the location of them. So, wild pigs have a movement pattern that can kind of be described as general wandering, where they're just kind of constantly wandering around searching for food, usually. They do cover large amounts of space, though, as the average monthly home range of a wild pig is 3.4 kilometers squared. However, male home ranges are typically double of the females. This figure here shows some of the home ranges for pigs that I had collared. The pink ones are representing the female, and then that bluish color is representing the males. As you can see, those male home ranges are quite a bit bigger. Other research has also already documented that pigs kind of reliably visit bait sites that are 1 to 1.25 kilometers from their location. But it's really unknown why pigs visit some sites within their home range, but not others. So another thing, thinking about how pigs interact at bait sites and thinking about the potential competition and exclusion. It's been documented that social status and territoriality can influence camera visitation and trapping for pigs as well as other species. And we know that males and sounders are semi-territorial. So we've seen that males display territoriality over resources and mating opportunities. And then sounders have been documented to exhibit spatiotemporal avoidance of groups over food resources. So because of this, there is the potential for territoriality to occur over bait sites as this is a food source. This is important to start thinking about if management is trying to target these sounders and females if they are being excluded from a bait site or being outcompeted from a bait site. It's important to be able to understand that interaction if they are being targeted. So, the overall objective of my project was to determine what factors influence pig visitation to sites for management purposes. And then within that, we had kind of these three sub-objectives. The first one was to figure out whether a scent lure, bait, or combination is most effective at attracting wild pigs. And then we wanted to determine what habitat attributes aid in site selection for higher visitation rates. And then we also wanted to investigate how pig movement and space use influences site detection. So all of the research that I'm going to be talking about here on out was conducted on the Savannah River site, which is an 800 kilometer squared property owned by the Department of Energy. 96% of this is forested habitat or undeveloped land. And it has had pigs since the 1950s, and they're very abundant on this site, making it an ideal location to be able to look at wild pig response. So to tackle that attractant objective, that first one, I want to start by saying there are tons of bait and scent lures available to use for wild pigs, but we had to make selections to be able to get the sample size that we wanted. So we did this based on how baits and scent lures performed in other studies, as well as their availability near our study site. So for bait, we selected to use corn and peanuts. And then for scent lures, we selected to use strawberry, Samhain heat, tough tusk sour mash, and worm tea. So in the field, if a trial was supposed to receive bait, it would receive 25 pounds of corn or that equivalent volume of peanuts. And then for our scent, we made plaster tabs and would soak them in the scent. And then these would be hung in these plastic cages in a tree above our bait pile in frame of our camera. For our control sites, we would not deploy a bait or a scent. It would just be that camera. So we would select a random point within pig habitat of our study area, which we considered that bottomland hardwoods, wetlands, swamps, and riparian areas. And these would be deployed for 7 days. So we conducted a total of 750 of these trials from January to April of 2023. This map shows all of those points. As you can see, they are kind of clumped together, and that's just because they were in what we considered optimal pig habitat for this study site. And so we wanted to investigate whether a site was visited and also time to initial detection because we want pigs to visit sites and we want them to visit fast. So hopping into some results. So after cleaning up our data, we were left with 743 trials that we ran analysis on. Wild pigs visited about 40% of those trials. So on this map, you can see those red and green dots. The green dots represent those sites that were visited, and the red represents sites that were not. Further, we found that groups of wild pigs visited a little over 22%, and individual pigs visited over 37%. So we found no evidence that any of the specific combinations performed better. Corn and peanuts performed similarly to each other, and none of the scents on their own outperformed one another. So we categorized everything into treatment. So that was being bait only, scent only, bait plus scent, and control. So first I want to look at our visitation results. So this figure, we have those treatment types I just listed out on the x-axis, and then we have our percentage of sites visited on the y. The colors of the bars represent whether a site was just visited by a pig, whether an individual pig visited, or a group of pigs visited. So from this, I want to highlight that we had higher visitation at bait and bait plus scent compared to our scent only sites. We also saw that our groups had higher visitation at our bait plus scent compared to our control sites. And then we also saw that pigs visited more control sites than expected. About 35% of our control sites were visited, which was a little bit surprising because these just consisted of a camera. However, this was mostly individual pigs, as you can see by that gray bar. So then I mentioned we also wanted to investigate the time to detection. So for this figure, again, x-axis, we have our treatment types, but now on our y-axis, we have the time to initial detection, and the colors of the bars represent the same thing. So The main thing to take away from this figure is that we saw that all pigs had shorter times to detection for bait plus scent in control sites compared to our scent only sites. We also saw that groups of pigs had shorter times to detection to our control sites than our other treatments. However, this is likely driven by sample size because groups only visited 5 of our control sites. So this was just looking at that for 5 sites. I also want to highlight individuals, those gray bars. There was no difference in time to detection for any of the treatments for individuals. So, breaking these figures down to what they mean, we found that a food reward increases the likelihood of detection and decreases time to initial detection. So, it's really important to put bait at a trap site. We also found that you can use a variety of food baits. So, you should be selecting based on local availability. As long as pigs are recognizing it as a food source, it should be able to attract them. We also were surprised and had lower detection rates than we expected. This may be because our study was conducted on the Savannah River site. There have been pigs here for many years and they've been managed for many years by numerous people. So there's the potential that some of these pigs exhibit bait aversion due to seeing other pigs interact with bait and be trapped. So we know scent has been shown to attract numerous species, but despite wild pigs' advanced olfactory systems, our results add to the growing body of literature that scent is not effective. Our control sites had higher detection than we expected. However, this is likely because we were placing our sites in pig habitat, so where pigs likely were to be, and they were just encountering them by chance. However, an interesting thing is that these control sites had higher visitation than our scent only. So this suggests to us that there may be some aversion to novel scents, and we should be careful when introducing these scents to wild pigs. However, we do recommend further research looking at GPS collars to determine if the bait plus scent can attract pigs from further distances, which we'll get to later. So, thinking about this in regards to social groups, as I've touched on before, sounder removal is often targeted by managers due to females having high reproductive potential. We found that sounders visited fewer control and scent sites than bait, signifying that bait is especially important for attracting them to a site. We also saw that individual males visited more control sites than sounders. This makes sense. Males have large home ranges and are just moving more, so they're probably encountering these sites just more by chance. So now we'll move into that second objective, determining what habitat attributes aid in site selection for higher visitation. So we looked at a variety of habitat attributes, thinking about what is biologically important for pigs and what's also useful for managers. So to highlight a few of the things we looked at, one of them was looking at hard mass producing trees. We know hard mast is an important food source for wild pigs, so determining if that placing bait sites near that could attract pigs more likely. We also wanted to look at understory as that provides cover for these animals and is often they need them for bed sites. We investigated water as this is really important for wild pigs since they're poor thermoregulators and we've all seen their wallows and their damage around bodies of water. We also wanted to investigate roads because these are movement corridors for wild pigs. And as a trapper myself, I would much rather be able to put a bait site right on a road or next to a road than have to lug it in through the woods. So we evaluated all of these. And what we found is that pig visitation was positively influenced by sites that were closer to water sources, in an increased understory density, in an understory of palmettos, and at locations with bait. So first, I want to highlight this line graph at the bottom. So this is looking at distance to water in meters and then the probability of wild pigs visiting a site on the y-axis. So what we found is the odds of detecting a wild pig at a bait site decreased by over 11% for every 100-meter increase in the distance to a water source. And then we have the bar graph above. So this is broken into primary understory types that we categorized for our study area. And then the y-axis is percentage of pig visits. So from this, we found that pigs were more likely to visit sites when the dominant understory type was palmettos. So what we found is that habitat is really important. It's just as important as bait. So it's really important to scout areas for pig sign. We recommend starting in areas with water and dense understory nearby for trapping purposes. We know water is a really important resource for wild pigs. They're poor thermoregulators, and we see them wallowing in water. They also will forage near water. Water's also been documented as one of the only things to exclude pigs from an area. We also found the understory was really important. The understory is what provides shelter and cover for these animals. It's where they're going to bed, it's where they're going to nest. It also provides shade, which is important in the summer, especially. We found that saw palmettos in our area um, were the most important type, which makes sense. These are very dense, and so they're going to provide that cover that you also get with a dense understory. Also, wild pigs have been documented consuming parts of palmettos and constructing nesting or bedding sites with them. So kind of what to take away from this is thinking about what areas are the most piggy in the place that you're working. So we know water is important everywhere, but then kind of considering what dense vegetation your area provides for bedding sites and cover. It's really important to think about getting sites as close as possible to where pigs are spending their time to increase the likelihood of them detecting them. So then hopping into our third objective, we wanted to look at how pig movement and space use also influences site detection. So we wanted to kind of take that first part a step further, investigate kind of why pigs are finding some of these sites and not others by deploying these GPS collars so we actually know where they are and what they're doing to some extent. So we captured wild pigs and collared 52 of them. And we wanted to investigate some specific factors in the field. So the first one is we wanted to look at different usage areas within the home range and placing bait within these different ones and looking at detection. So that center orange piece is going to be where pigs are spending their most time. The green, a little bit less, but still a lot. And then that pink is where they're spending the least amount of time. However, they still are going out and using that space. We also wanted to investigate bait presentation. So for this study, we looked at placing bait either all in a pile in front of our cameras or dispensing it in trails leading to that pile, 25 meters in each direction. And then we also wanted to investigate adding a scent lure to determine if that was attracting pigs from further distances. So in the field, we would select a random point and a random treatment, those treatments being the combinations of the different usage areas, bait placement, and scent addition. These would be deployed for 14 days or until the target collared individual located that site. If the bait got depleted before the 14 days or before the collared pig found it, we would go out and refresh that bait or replenish it. So there was bait on the ground that whole 14 days or until it found it. We conducted 325 of these trials. So there also was some things we wanted to address that were not accounted for in the field when thinking about why wild pigs might be visiting some sites within their home range and not others. So we processed all of our photos and identified pigs that were in the social group of the collared individual. So that then we could determine if pigs from another social group or just outside of their social group visited a site before them. We also calculated the distance between the pig and the bait at the time the bait was deployed. We also calculated monthly home range size and assigned a trial number. We also assigned season based on food availability. And for this, again, we wanted to look at whether an individual visited and that time to initial detection. So we found that our individuals visited about 42% of our trials. This was lower than expected due to these all being within their home range. We would have thought our visitation rates would have been higher. However, we found that distance, isopleth, and other pigs before were significant for visitation as well as time to detection. So our two space use metrics were significant for whether our collared individual visited or not. First, I want to highlight the line graph over here on the left. So we have on the x-axis the distance in meters between the pig and the trial at the time of deployment. And then on the y-axis, we have the probability of a collared pig visiting. So what we found is that the odds a target wild pig located a bait site decreased by about 10% for every 100-meter increase between the wild pig and the trial at the time of deployment. So then we have this bar graph over here. So on the x-axis, we have isopleth. So that's representing the different usage areas within the home range. And then on the y-axis, we have percentage of sites visited. So for this, I want to highlight that our collared wild pigs were less likely to locate bait sites in the 99% isopleth, which is that outer area of the home range, compared to the 40 and 70. So then, as I mentioned, our space use metrics were also significant for our time to detection. So we found that wild pigs were finding sites placed within that orange and green band more quickly compared to sites that were placed in that pink band. We also saw that as distance between pig and the bait at time of deployment increased, that time to initial detection also increased drastically. So this tells us that space use is important. All of our space use metrics were significant. We know wild pigs have large home ranges. However, they do display high site fidelity, which is shown by them finding those sites in the more of those center areas of their home range. And they were rarely visiting sites that were located on the periphery of their home range. They also were locating sites when they were much closer to them. On average, the sites that pigs located were about 750 meters away from them compared to the sites they were not finding. These were over 1,400 meters away from them. These two figures are good examples of what we were seeing most of the time. So that top one, that pig did not locate that trial. That pig was in the middle of its home range, and that trial was out on the edge of its home range, and they were pretty far apart at the time of deployment, and that was not located. Versus the figure on the bottom, both the pig and the trial were within the 70% isopleth, and they were pretty close to each other at the time of deployment. So I recognize that we usually don't have GPS collars on wild pigs, otherwise it would be a lot easier to be removing them from the landscape. However, it's really important to be able to get these bait sites in the areas that they are using. So that can be done by thinking about important habitat attributes, as well as using pig sign, looking for high concentrations of tracks, scat, rooting, and wallows. We also recommend placing multiple sites within an area that pigs are using or within their home range to increase the likelihood of detection. So then, as I mentioned before, pigs from other social groups visiting before was also important in predicting whether our collared pigs were visiting these sites or not. So this figures a lot, but on the x-axis, we have whether a pig from another social group visited before, yes or no. On the y-axis, we have the percentage of sites visited by our collared target pig. And then these are broken up into whether it was a male that visited before, a female that visited before, or a sounder before. And then the colors of the bars represent whether the collared individual was a female or a male. So, from this, we specifically found that collared female wild pigs were less likely to visit bait sites if an adult male visited the site before them. So, this was also significant in time to initial detection as well. So for this figure, we have time to initial detection in hours on the x-axis. And then on the y-axis, we have the probability of a bait site persisting or not being visited by a collared pig. So this figure is just for our collared female pigs and whether a male from another social group was present before them, yes or no. So we saw collared female wild pigs had longer times to detection if an adult male visited the bait site before them compared to sites that adult males did not. So we found that there was a decrease in visitation and an increased time to detection for our target female wild pigs if a male visited before. So this is suggesting that males were displacing target females from bait sites in this study. We know that wild pigs are large, aggressive animals. These males have tusks. They often have this shoulder shield, which is a thickened layer of tissue that serves as protection during fights. It's also been well documented that numerous species display sexual segregation, where males and females live separately. We see this in wild pigs. We also know that wild pigs may display aggression towards offspring like other species. It's been well documented that females will defend an area and isolate their activity during nesting. So, because of this, what we're seeing is males may be displaying aggression over bait sites as this is a food source. This is important to be aware of if females and sounders are being targeted, because a male may need to be removed in order for females and sounders to begin to utilize a bait site and not be excluded from it. So, as I mentioned, we wanted to investigate scent and determine if scent with bait could pull pigs in from further distances. We found that adding scent to bait did not increase visitation. And we actually found that sites placed on the edge of the home range with scent had the longest times to detection. So that's signifying that scent is not pulling pigs in from further distances or pulling them out of their core area to come to these bait sites with scent. This adds to the growing body of literature that scent is not effective and could even lead to avoidance by wild pigs. We also found that the different bait presentation methods we tried did not influence visitation or time to detection, that it's really just important about making sure that there is a food item there and not necessarily how it is placed. So, main trapping takeaways from our study, we found that bait is an extremely important tool. You can use any bait that is available in your area as long as wild pigs are recognizing it as a food source. It's really important to pre-bait and continue baiting throughout the trapping process to keep these pigs fed and coming to these sites. We also recommend being wary of using scent attractants. It's not effective, is what we are finding, and it's adding to that growing body of literature. I would much rather carry some scent into a site than a 50-pound bag of corn. However, it doesn't work. Make sure you're carrying in that bait to your sites. You also may want to consider removing males to increase the likelihood of females visiting. If a male is using a site, it may be worth trapping or removing that male in order to see if females will show up at that site. Females may be in an area, they just may be excluded from that exact bait. So this is really important to consider because we want to trap as many pigs as we can, especially those females with the high reproductive potential. I also just want to highlight again that we had lower detection rates than we would like in both of our studies, being that wild pigs are abundant at our study site. We found individuals were only visiting about 40% of these sites, even when they were placed within their home range. Because of this, we really recommend placing multiple sites in an area where you presume there are pigs to increase the likelihood of them detecting one of them. Further, we also want to highlight that pigs can become educated by bait, traps, human scent, etc. So it's really important to conduct whole sounder removal to avoid educating other pigs within a sounder of bait and traps, etc. We also want to highlight the fact that location is so important. It's just as important as placing an attractant on the landscape. What we're finding is you can put about anything on the landscape as long as it's not going to spook the pigs off. And if pigs are there, they're going to be detected on camera. This can be done by focusing on habitat and high density of pig sign. For habitat, we know that water, food, and cover are important for wild pigs. We specifically found that water and dense vegetation for cover was important, so we recommend a trapper should consider water sources and dense vegetation types in their area when looking for locations to place bait sites. We also want to highlight that location is so important that if wild pigs aren't detecting a site in a reasonable time, like a week or so, a site should just be moved or another one should be added because it's probably not about what is there. It's probably more due to the fact that there are not pigs in that exact spot. And then I just want to conclude by saying it's not really about having expensive or fancy things to attract wild pigs. It's really just about knowing the pigs and knowing where they are at. And so, with that, I need to acknowledge the Department of Energy, the University of Georgia, USDA Wildlife Services, and then Dr. Nathan Snow, who was on my committee of my master's and was played a huge role in planning and implementing this project, as well as Dr. D'Angelo, who also was a committee member, and then Caitlin Kupferman and all the technicians that helped with the field work of this project. And with that, I can take any questions. Abby, if you are facilitating that. I also have my email on here. If there's any other questions that people have after, they can reach out to me as well.
Yes, thank you so much for that, Sydney. Like your research is super extensive. You covered a ton of topics. It wasn't just baiting, it was all the things. And baiting is always one of the big questions that we get asked. So it's really awesome to hear like what our like the current research or new research is seeing. So thank you again for being here, for sharing
Yeah,
with us.
thank
But yeah, it's
you.
time for some questions. We've had one come in so far. So everyone, if you have any questions for Sydney, please type them into the Q&A and we'll go through as many as we can. So our first question is about any strategies for keeping deer away from eating your bait at your bait site. I know your research is more about attractants. Pigbrig has some recommendations, but I'll hand it off to you in case you know of anybody who's doing any research of that nature, if you've heard anything on how to keep deer away from your bait.
Yeah, like Abby touched on, I didn't specifically look at that. We were just looking at attractants for wild pigs. However, I do recognize that that is a large problem that we all deal with in trapping, watching your bait site get depleted by deer and raccoons, especially. I know that there is some research going on with those types of things. I know people have been looking at capsaicin and liquid deer fence. I don't know the exact results of those studies, but I do know those are out there in the literature and stuff. So definitely worth looking into because people are looking at that because we do all recognize that as a problem.
Yeah, so funny you should say those two specific like deterrents, because those are some deterrents that we've done research with and some that we recommend. So our first recommendation is going to be try to bait close to dark, just to close that window in between the time the deer get there and the hogs get there, because typically your hogs are going to spook off the deer. So that's going to be number one. But also making sure like you can sour your corn if you have like lower deer densities. It's not 100% effective, but it's a really great tool to have, a cost-effective tool to have. But our most effective one that we have found is liquid fence. So that's a great example, a great thing to try out if you're struggling with deer at your site. We recommend getting a concentrate of liquid fence and mixing it at 2 times the label rate and spraying it over your corn. And that has helped decrease the deer activity around sites while also allowing, the hogs, it's not deterring them from eating the corn. So that would be a good thing to try out. So great that you had already mentioned that. And I think we have some more questions rolling in too. So another question, in using corn, did you soak the method before setting it out, or did you put the corn out of the sack as is?
So we did not sour our corn for this study. That was something we had considered. We know that's common for trappers. But again, we were just so limited with what we could do to be able to get the sample size needed to address our questions. I know some people have a lot of luck with soured corn. So if that's working for you, awesome. If that's something you want to try, go for it as well. It still is a food source, and so that's the main important thing there. So it should be able to attract wild pigs. But again, would have loved to have evaluated that too, but just we're limited on what we could use. So we just use dry corn straight out of the bag.
Yeah, and that's a great point. There is always another question. Research is always going to pose another question. But you guys, like I said, you guys did cover a ton of questions, tons of variables. So it was really interesting to hear all of that. So we have another question. What was your findings about time consistencies that the pigs visited? Did the visit during the same times? Oh, sorry. Did they visit during the same times of day or night, or were the visits more sporadic?
So for this study, we were only looking at whether they visited in that time to initial detection. So we weren't looking at exactly like were they coming at the night, like were they coming back. We didn't evaluate any of that for this study. I know from personal experience trapping, usually pigs, once there's a food source and there's a steady food source that they get pretty regular and they're going to come at that same time. Especially if you have a feeder going off at 3 a.m., more than likely they're going to learn that feeder sound and they're going to be there at 3:30 a.m. I like to trap that way, so I can get my pigs in my trap at a certain time. But they usually do become pretty regular to bait. But again, that wasn't what we were specifically looking at in this project.
Interesting. So whenever you like for a personal preference, whenever you trap, you like to set a timer, like to have your pigs at the trap at like a specific time in the middle of the night.
Yeah, so like if I'm using a spin feeder, those you typically can program to set to go off
Mhm.
at a certain time. And so if I'm setting a trap when I'm leaving work at 5 p.m. that afternoon and I'm not planning on checking it till 7 a.m. the next morning, I'd prefer that they don't go in there at 5 p.m. and are in there that long. So I'll set a feeder to go off at 3 a.m. or 5 a.m. the whole time that I'm baiting there to try to get um, them regular to that time. And they usually do learn that pretty quickly. They know when the food's there and when it's not. They also can learn your truck too, that sound. I've seen that happen where they know the sound of a truck pulling up and they know that corn bag's coming out and it's shaking corn in there. And that truck pulls away and 10 minutes later they're there feeding.
Yeah, they're definitely like creatures of habit, or they pick up on a routine really easily. So
Yeah.
that can definitely work in your favor whenever you're trapping. So we do have some a few more questions pop up. So let's see here. So An attendee has asked, it says, I have shot as many as 9 pigs in the trap and had more pigs in the trap the next day. Does research show that killing pigs in a trap deters other pigs from entering the trap, making it necessary to relocate the trap?
Yeah, so I don't know if anyone has specifically looked at that. I can talk about that a little bit from like personal experience.
Mhm.
Um, I've also seen that happen where I can dispatch pigs out of a trap and the next day there's more in there. I've also had traps where I know that I've missed pigs or I know that there's other pigs nearby or I know pigs have now moved in that I've removed these, and they will not go to that exact same spot. But I can move the trap 10 meters away and they'll go in it. So I think we have to kind of think about pigs as they all are a little bit different. They're different
Mhm.
from location, and even at a location, they have different kind of temperaments or tolerance to things, which I'm sure everyone's kind of seen in the field. Like sometimes you have pigs, you can about walk up to them and dump food right next to them, and they don't really care. And other ones, like you come remotely closer, they even smell you and they hightail it out of there. So I think it's kind of more along those lines than anything. But I'm not sure if there's any specific papers looking at that, but that is interesting. I'm definitely going to be looking that up after this.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have another. What would cause a sounder to visit an empty feeder versus a baited trap?
Um, I mean, if they have seen feeders before and know that food comes out of there, they may be coming to investigate that feeder compared to a trap. Like I said, it'd just be if they had known that food was there before. Also, like I said, we weren't finding scent to be effective, but by the biology of these animals, they have a very advanced olfactory system. So there may even be like the smell left over of corn or whatever bait on that feeder, causing them to go visit that. Also, if a trap wasn't like properly staged or things along those lines, even if there's bait in there, they may not want to go in that because it's too weird to them. It's not worth the risk for the food.
So what would you consider a trap that's properly staged?
I mean, everyone goes about trapping a little bit differently. I've worked with enough people to know that. Um, for me, I mean, I've primarily used pig brig net traps for my pig trapping experience. And so for me, what I do is I put the T-posts up, then I put the net up, and then I have a camera up and I'm looking if these pigs are visiting. If they came all the way into my trap site, and we're eating the corn, interacting there, not looking spooked or running off, I'll lower the net a little bit. If the next night, same thing happens, I'll lower the net again. Same thing happens third night. Maybe at that point, I'll set it. But I start with that net all the way up, and then I have it like touching their backs, and then I have it down before I actually then fully pin it down so that they can get comfortable and used to that trap. But like I said, I know everyone uses them a little bit differently. But for me, I have seen people throw, whether it's a pig brig net trap up or another trap up, they just throw that object up and have it fully set, ready to go. And that's weird to the pigs. And they're like, I don't like this. This is different. I've never seen this before. I'm not touching that food.
Yeah, yeah, no, exactly. And like you said, like everyone does it a little bit differently. At Pig Brig, we generally like have the net up, like you said, broadcast the bait on the outside to get them used to it first, eating on the outside, have the net up in conditioning, and then we actually go straight to from conditioning to set. But that's mainly just to deter deer. So
Mhm.
in areas where it's like you have a high deer density, circling back to the original question with deer and whatnot, if you know you have antlered bucks in the area, then maybe not lowering the net in increments just to prevent that from happening. But yeah, in certain situations, it maybe could be beneficial, but definitely, yeah, being weary of the deer is good to have in the back of the trapper's mind. So the next question we have here is, our pigs keep getting out of the pig brig after being there for more than 4 hours. Do you have any suggestions? We are in Hawaii, Big Island, and I'm not close to the pig brig to get there in time before they get out. So being as this is specific to pig brig, I'll, start with the answer for this one. So for keeping the hogs in the trap, there's going to be a couple of things to keep in the back of the mind. So the first thing is going to be making sure that you're leaving plenty of bait to keep them occupied throughout the night. And our general recommendation is going to be about 5 pounds per hog that you have coming to your trap site. So making sure that they're well fed, keeping them all fat and happy while they're in the trap system, making sure they're going to be occupied throughout the night. And then secondly, it's getting there right at or right before first light. So once first lights hits, hogs tend to get, a little antsy. They feel more vulnerable, more exposed during the daylight hours. So we recommend getting there right at first light to dispatch. And those two things specifically really help to make like hogs more comfortable in the trap system. But if you're doing these things and you're still struggling, please feel free to give us a call and we can work through like the specifics of your setup. Our phone number is 833-744-2744. We're happy to help. But I'll move on from that question. He said, or we have our next question is, were there multiple sounders visiting bait sites during your study?
Yeah, so for we were specifically looking at that for the collard portion of that because, like I said, we had identified pigs within a sounder of a collard pig, so that then we could identify ones that were not. We had several occurrences where a sounder external to the sounder that collard pig was in was visiting a site. And I've seen that in my job now where we've captured multiple sounders. They come at
Mm.
slightly different times, but one will funnel into that pig rig, and then a couple hours later, another one will funnel in.
Yeah, and we've seen that as well. Have you seen where a sounder like just refuses to enter if there's another sounder at your trap site?
I've also seen that as well.
Yeah, I believe sounder dynamics are going to be like a key factor, but it's not impossible. So great to that you've experienced that. So another question I have for you, besides corn, did you discover any other baits that were attractive to pigs? And which source would you draw more pigs? A pond in a clear area or undergrowth in a wet area?
Yeah. So we looked at corn and dry whole peanuts for our study. This was, like I said, in South Carolina. Both of those are very abundant and available to purchase through farmers for very affordable. Both of these worked really well at attracting pigs in that first part, comparing attractants. And for that second portion where we are looking at the collared pigs, since we were going to conduct all of our bait trials with corn, we actually trapped them all with peanuts so that they weren't associating corn as getting trapped, at least not from us. They didn't have that correlation. And so we were able to effectively trap pigs off of peanuts. And then they also were visiting our corn sites. If you look at the previous literature that's been done around the world about pig baits, most of those are just looking at baits that are abundant in their area. And so pretty much anything that pigs recognize as a food source, you can utilize as a bait. Some other studies have found, like I mentioned, both of those have been effective. Milo also has been used, soybeans, a lot of those agricultural products that pigs are rooting up in fields anyways are going to be pretty common. And then thinking about your habitat type of question,
Mhm.
both of those would be good options to think about placing a bait site. However, with that, what I would do is think about those sites and walk out to them. And before I place bait, I'd look around and be like, are there pig tracks here? Is there scat here? Is there wallows? Is there rooting? To kind of determine where the pigs are. The habitat stuff is kind of more of like a starting point of thinking about. But a lot of times once you walk to those sites, then you're like, oh yeah, there's pigs here, there's sign everywhere, and that's kind of what you can utilize. I will say, thinking from a trapper perspective, a lot of times I am not putting my traps in dense vegetation. You have to clear all of that vegetation in order for a trap to go in there. So a lot of times it's right next to dense vegetation or adjacent to it. Um, to avoid having to do that, I have trapped in dense vegetation. It just takes a little more work to get that area clear. So if you can use that open area or an adjacent right next to that dense understory, from a trapping perspective, that's easier. But again, just taking the time to find that pig sign is going to be really key in using that habitat to get you there.
Perfect. Thank you for that. Okay, so next up, do you modify your spin feeder to put out enough corn to keep the pigs interested? Pig Brig recommends 5 pounds per pig. Will feeders dump that much corn in a relatively short amount of time?
Yes, so I adjust the feeders to the amount of pigs that are there. If I only have one male coming, I'm not gonna waste corn. Bait's expensive. When you're trapping pigs, like a lot of pigs, like the project I'm on now, you are trying to conserve that bait because it's expensive. So using the feeders is a really good way to do that. So instead of me dumping that whole 50-pound bag for one adult male, I can trigger it so it's only letting like 5 or 10 or whatever pounds out. So I definitely program mine that way. Um, I don't necessarily follow the exact like 5 pounds per pig. I just kind of have seen it enough to know like, oh, I should have it go off at this speed for this many seconds if I have a large sounder versus an individual pig. But I do think the 5 pounds per pig definitely makes sense and is a good way to conserve some money and some bait.
Right, yeah. And Pigbrig actually has an addition that can be added to our setup is called our Brig Baiter, and that will drop the bait straight down into the trap system. So it functions similar to a spin feeder, but the spin feeder you have to, adjust to have it drop straight down. Our Brig Baiter is designed to drop straight down already. You shoot it a text, it drops down. So that's a great addition for anyone who's looking for a feeder. And then kind of circling back to you were talking about like the number of hogs you have coming to a site. Our next question is, what's the highest number of pigs you've had in your pig brig?
We had I've I've worked captures that are huge. We've actually set like two brigs next to each other to contain all the pigs. I was not the trapper, I was just the helper in that situation, so I don't remember the exact number. But I've personally a trap that I've set and everything. I've caught 24 was my highest.
Awesome. Beautiful. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
Okay, so we have one more in our Q&A. It says, I have 4 trappings over 10 months, 2 nights back to back for a catch of 3 and then a catch of 26. Months later, I caught 2, and then weeks later, I caught 1. But there are 2 or 3 that will never go in. Do you think they ever will, or should I move it to another place?
They're there. So as long as they're holding on bait, obviously there's the potential that they've seen this trap and seen pigs within their sounder or other pigs be in this trap and then not be in this trap. So there is mild concern that they could be educated. However, I think like a main thing would be maybe just placing a bait pile outside of that trap and seeing if they'll come to that bait pile first. And then if you can lure them into the trap by trailing that bait in, put that bait 20 feet away, I don't know, and then trail it in. Otherwise, yeah, considering moving that trap also might be effective if they're in the area but not using that exact spot anymore.
Yeah, and then another pro of that is just giving the pigs a little bit of a breather. So continuous pressure over time can make pigs, a little bit more on edge, a little bit more hesitant around your trap system. So having that trap site or trap system shifted over, just for a little bit, trying to trap some other pigs and then going back to that site, see if you can snag them again. That might be helpful and giving them just, a little bit of time to calm down. But I believe that's all the time we have for questions. Really, thank you so much, Sydney, for being here. Your presentation was awesome. Your answers were awesome. We really appreciate you being here. And thank you to everyone who's joined us here tonight. We couldn't do it without you guys. We really appreciate the interest and all the questions. And just as a reminder, this has been recorded. You'll get a recording in your email inbox within a couple of weeks, whenever this is made available. So please watch out for that. We also send emails out about other webinars. So watch out, be on the lookout for our upcoming webinar on March 19th. I mentioned at the beginning, we have a Q&A set for March 19th. Thanks again, everyone, for sharing your time with us. We'll try to answer some of your questions via email, the ones that we didn't get to. But yeah, thank you guys for joining us. We'll see you next time.